All right, show of hands. Did anybody read the book of Ruth this week? Good, yeah. I'm really excited. We're this journey through this sweet story. The early part of our scripture is, I think, a great way to walk through this Advent season. I actually want to start, though, with our Advent reading for today. From Isaiah chapter 11, we heard that from the stump of Jesse, a little shoot would grow up. The picture that we're supposed to have in our mind is of a tree cut down in its prime, nothing left but a dry, cracked stump. It doesn't look like anything can grow. But then miraculously, God is going to make this little green shoot pop up in the middle of that barren place. Jesse is King David's father, and the prophet is looking forward to the day and saying, it looks like David's line has been cut off, like there is no more king in Israel, but God is going to send the Messiah, the son of David, to come and regather his people. I love that whole passage that talks so much about not just our own personal needs and hopes, but also the hopes for the whole world, for reconciliation across nations, coming back to the Lord. But it all stems from this little green shoot that's going to pop up from Jesse's root. The book of Ruth is a great tie-in to that whole story. One, it actually provides the backstory for the family of David. For the town of Bethlehem, we have this great backdrop here for this Advent season. Ruth becomes the great-great-grandmother of King David. She's in the line of the Messiah himself. Bethlehem is a prominent city in the midst of this story. And so there's a lot of reasons to look at Ruth. It also is a book that is filled with hope and longing and waiting and dashed dreams. It begins in darkness, and it's that's the theme of Advent. We're in this moment of kind of bringing up all of our hopes, our fears, our frustrations, and looking forward to the light that's going to come into our world. And so that I'm just excited to jump into the book of Ruth with us. The book of Ruth could easily have been titled the book of Naomi, the mother. She is just as much a prominent figure in this story. And I would say chapter 1 in particular is Naomi's stump moment. She has gone through intense tragedy. Her family line has been cut down to the root. It doesn't look like anything can grow. And she's become bitter and frustrated. And at least by the end of this chapter, she still can't see that there's this little bud of hope that God has started to sprout right next to her. So this is her stump moment. Let me go ahead and read the first chapter for us so that we can just enter into the story before we jump in. So here, the story of Ruth, this is the first chapter. During the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. A man with his wife and 2 sons went from Bethlehem of Judah to dwell in the territory of Moab. The name of the man was Elimelech, the name of his wife was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They entered the territory of Moab and settled there. But Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. Then only she was left along with her 2 sons. They took wives for themselves, Moabite women. The name of the first was Orpah, the name of the second was Ruth, and they lived there for about 10 years. But both of the sons, Mahlon and Chilion, also died. Only the woman was left without her 2 children and without her husband. Then she arose along with her daughters-in-law to return from the field of Moab, because while in the territory of Moab, she had heard from the Lord. She had heard that the Lord had paid attention to his people by providing food for them. She left the place where she had been, and her 2 daughters-in-law went with her. They went along the road to return to the land of Judah. Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, "Go back, turn, each of you to the household of your mother. May the Lord deal faithfully with you, just as you have done with the dead and with me. May the Lord provide for you, so that you may find security, each woman in the household of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. But they replied to her, "No, instead we will return with you to your people." Naomi replied, "Turn back, my daughters. Why would you go with me? Will there again be sons in my womb, that they would be husbands for you? Turn back, my daughters. Go, I am too old for a husband. If I were to say that I have hope, even if I had a husband tonight, and even more if I were to bear sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you refrain from having a husband? No, my daughters, this is more bitter for me than for you, since the Lord's will has come out against me." Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth stayed with her. Naomi said, "Look, your sister-in-law is returning to her people and to her gods. Turn back after your sister-in-law." But Ruth replied, Don't urge me to abandon you. Turn back from following after you. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do this to me, and more so if even death separates me from you. Then Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her. She stopped speaking to her about it. So both of them went along until they arrived at Bethlehem. When they arrived at Bethlehem, the whole town was excited on account of them, and the women of the town asked, "Could this be Naomi?" She replied to them, "Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has made me very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has returned me empty. So why would you call me Naomi, when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has deemed me guilty?" Thus Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, returned with her from the territory of Moab. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. So the setting of this story, line 1 says, "In the days when the judges ruled." Now that's the book of Judges. If you've read the book of Judges, you know it's the darkest era of all of Israel's history. It goes from bad to worse. The judges get worse and worse. It becomes chaotic and darkness. The final story of Judges is one of the hardest to read in the whole Hebrew Bible. It's full of bloodshed and injustice and misery. And it ends with this ominous refrain. The book of Judges ends with, "There was no king in Israel in those days. Everyone just did what was right in their own eyes." There's no king, there's no center, there's no direction. It's just misery, darkness, and chaos. And it's right in that setting that this story shines out. It's just this little small glimmer of light and hope as these women are trying to make ends meet in the midst of this hard time. That's one reason why it's such a great story to look at in this Advent season. Advent begins in the dark as we look forward to the light of the world that is to come, as we grapple with these hopes, these dashed dreams that we have. And so that's the story of Ruth. Before we jump into it, a personal story. About 10 years ago, I was in seminary. I was living in San Diego, and my good buddy Jamie and I would carpool up to Irvine, about an hour drive each way, to get to Hebrew class, this ancient language that you have to learn. And for one reason or another, I was just enamored with Hebrew. I couldn't get enough of it. Every waking moment was flashcards and paradigms and parsing verbs. And so week after week, I kept topping the class. One of these drives, Jamie looks over at me. We're both full-time youth pastors. We both have a family. And he goes, "Tyler, I don't get it. How are you doing so well at Hebrew?" And without thinking, I blurted out, "Jamie, Hebrew is the only good thing in my life right now." It was like, and even as I said it, I realized how ridiculous it sounded. Of course, that's not true. I had a loving family. I had a good community. Okay, my job was getting a little stressful. I felt like I was under a lot of pressure at the time, but it was not that bad. But that was my gut reaction. My feeling in the moment was, I have nothing going for me except parsing this ancient Hebrew verb. And if I can just memorize another paradigm, then maybe I'll get through another day. I don't know what it was, but that's what just blurted out. And I realized how ridiculous it sounded. In a way, Naomi, on a much more tragic and real level, is embodying that sort of emotional space. She actually has gone through real tragedy. She's lost her husband and her sons, and she feels like everything has come out against her. She has no hope left, and she can't even see. Her vision has become myopic, kind of like me in that car. I just all I could see was the next Hebrew verb. For her, she's looking around and she's saying, "There's nothing in my life. I'm completely empty." And she doesn't even see who's standing next to her. So as we jump into this story, one of the best ways to get into the book of Ruth, the names of the book of Ruth are super important. They all match perfectly their position, this cast of characters. So I have a little cast of characters for us, and getting into the Hebrew name of all of these actually kind of helps us tell the story. So Elimelech, we meet first, the husband. His name means "my God is king." Naomi means pleasant, but at the end of the chapter, she changes her name to Mara, which means bitter. Malon means sickly, and Kilion means wasting away or dying. Not the names I would have chosen for my kids, but we'll get there. What's going on there? They name their kids sickly and dying. Okay. Ruth means friend. Orpah means the nape of the neck, probably because she turns away and walks back to Moab. And then Bethlehem. Bet means house, and lechem means bread. Bethlehem, the house of bread, or the bakery. That's the town of the bakery. That's our backdrop today. So there's this deep irony right at the beginning of the story. Because in the time of Judges, when there's no king in Israel, apparently at least one family had just a glimmer of faith because they named their son, My God is King, in a time where there was no king. My God is King comes forth. His name is strong and powerful. His actions are a little ambiguous. The text doesn't really tell us if he did the right thing or not. But his name means, of course, God will provide, for my God is King. And he's living in the house of bread. But my God is King can't find bread in Bethlehem, right? It's this deep irony, this twist. What you wouldn't expect someone with such a strong name to not be able to rely on God to provide for him. And so he uproots his family. He leaves the house of bread and goes to Moab to try to find food because they're in this deep famine. There's precedent, especially in the book of Genesis. You see, oftentimes children are named, sometimes for the hopes that the parents have for their future, but sometimes just for their present circumstances. And so I can imagine Elimelech and Naomi naming their kids out of hopelessness. They're in the throes of this intense famine, and they don't even know if their kids are going to survive. And so they say, well, let's just name them Sickly and Wasting Away. I imagine maybe if their fortunes turned around, they would change their names later. But sadly, it kind of sets you up because you kind of expect the next part of the story. They go to Moab, but Elimelech, my God is King, dies, but then Sickly and Wasting Away also die. It's left with just the three widows trying to make ends meet. This is that stump moment. Everything has been cut down. It doesn't look like there's going to be any regrowth. And you can see there was already that sign that they had lost some hope in the naming of their sons. And now Naomi is just brought to her deepest level. She's hit absolute rock bottom here. Verse 6 is a crucial turning point in this story. See, she hears in the fields of Moab that the Lord has once again visited his people and provided food for them. What I like, actually, the word for food in verse 6 is the word lechem, bread. So she hears that the play on words there is really ripe. She hears that in the house of bread, God has provided bread once again. And so she turns her body and she starts to walk the long road back to Bethlehem. I want to just sit on this for a little bit because I believe Naomi offers for us an embodied picture of something called lament. There's a rich practice of lament in the Hebrew Bible. The Psalms, right at the heart of our Bible, is the prayer book of God's people. And they have prayers for every situation. Good psalms of praise and love and everything's going well. And then a lot of psalms, actually the majority of the psalms in the psalm book are these lament psalms, these protest psalms. They're crying out in their despair. God, why have you abandoned me? When are you going to give me release from my enemies? When are you going to show up? And more of the psalms actually filter through that lens than putting on a happy face and everything's good and lovely. And there's one thing that the Psalms really teach us. I have a quote from Walter Brueggemann. He is one of my favorite scholars about the Psalms in particular. And he wrote this book called The Spirituality of the Psalms. And he says this, in the spirituality of the Psalms, they teach us that everything must be brought to speech. Everything brought to speech must be addressed to God, who is the final reference for all of life. Now, I have trouble with both sides of this formula. First, everything must be brought to speech. I struggle because sometimes I just want to put on a happy face, bottle everything up, and not tell anybody that I'm going through anything. And so I just pretend like everything's okay and I don't actually let it out. The Psalms say, no, if you are feeling it, you should say it. But the next part is also important. You should address that to God, who can actually do something about it. And so you see these Psalms, even when they're bitter and angry and frustrated at God, they tell God that. They direct their body toward the only one who can actually do anything. See, my tendency, if I'm not bottling it up, I'm venting to a friend who can't actually do anything about my situation. The Psalms say, if you are feeling it, you should say it, and you should say it to God. Naomi in her body is like, she's kind of a living embodiment of this posture of lament because she's still bitter. Her circumstances haven't really changed. Emotionally, she still feels like God has come out against her. Actually, in a little bit, as we'll see, she comes back and she says, the Lord has brought me back empty, completely empty. But her body is still turned toward Bethlehem. She says, yeah, but I'm not going to go to some other nation. I'm not going to try another God, another spirituality. I'm still going to trust in the covenant God back in Bethlehem. I'm going to walk that direction. Even if I'm still worried about things, I'm still bitter, my theology isn't all completely sound and right and solid, I'm still going to take this long trek back to Bethlehem. So she's like living it out, this embodied lament. One quick example, one of my favorite transitions in the Psalms. Years back, I realized that the Psalms themselves are placed in the order that they're placed intentionally. I think inspired by the Holy Spirit. It's not just a bunch of disparate prayers randomly put together. They actually tell a story. And so the transition between Psalm 39 and 40 hit me several years back. See, Psalm 39 ends. It's one of the darker Psalms. Actually, the psalmist is so angry at God. The end of Psalm 39, he's crying out, God, just go away. Just look away from me so that I can be happy again. He is the farthest away from God than he's ever been. He says, God, I'm so angry. Just go away. And it's right there, the very next verse, Psalm 40, verse 1. God leaned down to me. He heard my cry and he lifted me up from the pit of despair. And I just seeing those two Psalms almost like playing off one another. It's in the moment when the psalmist felt the farthest away from his creator is the exact moment when God is actually leaning down and coming closer than he's ever been. I think that's where Naomi is in this moment. She's far from God. She thinks the Lord has judged her. She is bitter and God has sent me away empty. And it's right there that God is actually bringing this little shoot of green hope and blessing, but Naomi can't yet see it. But God is closer than ever, even though emotionally and in her head, she's farther from God than she's ever been. And that juxtaposition, that's the lament embodied. And again, that is what we're kind of wrestling with during this Advent season. What are the hopes that you have? What are the ways that you've felt like life has come out against you? What are the cries that you have, not only for your life, but for our world, that you feel like this just, it's not being answered? God, when are you going to show up? And our prayer during this Advent season is, God, will you let us see these little shoots of grace, of blessing, that you are still at work in our life? So back to the story. She's turning her body back to Bethlehem. And as she's walking, she gets a little practical. And she says, look, in our world, back in this day, for a woman, especially a widow, to find safety and security, really it almost required that she be married to a man. Right? That's just the way of the world back then. And so she gets really practical. She says, my daughters, I can't provide for you. I have no more sons to give you. If we all go back to Bethlehem, we'll just be three widows trying to make ends meet. You are better off if you go back to your land in Moab, back to your family, and maybe find a new husband there. I don't think we should go too hard on Orpah. She takes the more reasonable, practical approach. She clearly loves Naomi, but she realizes the truth in that statement, so she says, okay. And so she goes back to Moab. But then Ruth shows up, and Ruth does something completely unexpected. Ruth, down in verse 16, has one of the strongest statements of faith that you're going to find anywhere in Scripture. It's beautiful. She comes in and she says, don't urge me to abandon you. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Notice, Ruth does not have this naive hope. She doesn't say, Mom, I think if we go back to Bethlehem, everything's going to work out and all our dreams are going to come true. She actually says kind of the opposite. She says, I'm committed to you. And if it's our lot to go back to Bethlehem and die, that's what I'm going to do. What she's embodying here is another Hebrew term, chesed. That actually shows up all throughout the book of Ruth. Hesed is the Hebrew word for love, but it's deeper than that. It's this steadfast, loyal love. It's covenant love. It's the word that God uses to describe his commitment to his people. God has this hesed, steadfast, loyal love toward his people. And that loyal love is one of the prominent themes of the book of Ruth. Ruth comes in and it's this full conversion. She comes and says, no, I am no longer a Moabite. I am an Israelite. Your people are my people. Your God is my God. I have renounced all my other gods. And you, I am loyal and steadfast. My commitment is to you. And so she binds herself to Naomi in this beautiful way. Ruth is that green shoot sprouting up from Naomi's stump. Naomi can't see it yet. She just says, okay. I kind of, in verse 18, Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her. She stopped speaking to her about it. I kind of picture Naomi being a little exasperated. She says, all right, I'm just going to be resigned. You can come along, I guess. So Naomi still can't quite see it, but they go back to Bethlehem, to the town called Bakery. And the women here, okay, it's been about a decade or more, and Naomi's coming back, and they're getting excited, like, oh, is that Naomi? And here's where Naomi gives a little speech. She says, why would you call me pleasant? I'm not pleasant. Call me bitter. She renames herself Bitter or Mara. Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has made me very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord returned me empty. So why would you call me pleasant when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has deemed me guilty? I want to break down her speech here because in many ways, she gets it wrong. Like her theology is not actually super sound right here. She's saying things that are demonstrably untrue. The Lord has brought me back empty, and Ruth is standing right next to her. And especially as you know the story, Ruth becomes the seed. She actually is the way that God is about to provide more abundantly than Naomi could ever imagine. Bringing back sons, Ruth and Naomi now become part of the line of the kings of Israel and the Messiah himself. Like God has already started something. It's this little shoot, this budding up of hope, but the Lord has not brought her back empty. So she gets it wrong. We could just say that. But I think, again, this is her lament. If you're feeling it, you should say it. Everything should be brought to speech, and that speech should be directed. God can handle our bad theology. Like if you're bitter and angry and there's something frustrating you in your life, there's hopes that you feel like God has not met, there's dreams that are being dashed, you can tell God that. God can handle it. And he can, even if he's winking and saying, yeah, the answer is right around the corner. It's okay. We don't have to put on a happy face every single time we come to prayer. And so she lets it all out. She lets out all of her bitterness and frustration. A metaphor I kept thinking about this week to help me understand Naomi's posture. Think about the last time you watched a toddler learning how to walk. I got 4 kids. We've been through that season 4 times now. And as they're just beginning to walk, they are wobbly and shaky with their legs. They fall down a lot, but they can look across the room. They can fix their eyes on something or on someone, and they can make their way across the room to that person, right? It's a great moment. One of my girls, or Johnny, is like walking for the first time over into my arms, but kind of shaky and wobbly. And we're wondering if he's going to fall at any moment. Naomi, I think her faith is like that. Right now, in this moment, in chapter 1, it's wobbly and shaky. She's pointed in the right direction. She's walking back to Bethlehem, to the city where God is going to provide bread once again, to the covenant God of Israel. She's not going some other nation and some other God, but her faith is a little shaky right now because God, understandably so. I have not gone through anything to the extent that Naomi has gone through. So we give her some credit there. But she is bitter and angry, but she can't see any of the blessing that God is bringing out for her. And so she's just letting it all out. And God's like, yeah, I can take that. I can take your frustration. I can take your bitterness. Just keep walking with your faulty steps toward me. So I love that. Can we be more like Naomi? Sometimes our faith is still a little wobbly. I don't have a perfect answer to everything. My theology isn't perfect. Sometimes I even say things that are wrong. And yet I'm still hopefully walking one step closer and closer to the covenant God who can actually do anything about my circumstance. So then the chapter ends I think in a way similar to that verse in Isaiah chapter 11. I think I put the two verses up on a slide. Once again, Isaiah 11, kind of coming back full circle, said, out of the stump of Jesse, a shoot would spring forth. And then the final line of Ruth, chapter 22, or verse 22, says, they arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. It's not a answer to prayer. Everything has not been resolved, but it's just this little glimmer of hope. There's this barren stump, but this little green shoot is just starting to poke its head up. They're just at the beginning of the barley harvest. In the town called Bakery, wheat is just starting to bud again. God, are you ending the famine? Are you starting to answer our prayers? It's not a full answer just yet. And I feel like, one, this is, again, it's not a full resolution, but it's a great way to start this Advent series because we're bringing up, what are the hopes, the prayers, the dreams that I have? And maybe the answer is not fully there yet, but I'm still waiting. I'm in the dark, but can I see God? Have you just started to sprout up some new hope, some new blessing in my life? They arrived at Bethlehem at just the beginning of the barley harvest. I want to use this to anchor us. We are going to take communion today. And as I was reflecting on communion, this meal that Jesus gave us, it's a great segue from this reflection on hope and waiting. We're in the dark. We're waiting for the light to come. As a church, through this series, we're going to be walking toward Bethlehem for the next couple weeks as we get ready for Christmas. Bethlehem is the house of bread. Jesus, whose one of his titles is the bread of life. The bread of life will be born in the house of bread. We're waiting for that day. We're still kind of on the march to Bethlehem. And so we're at the beginning of the barley harvest. We're just seeing these little green shoots crop up. It's not the full answer to prayer, but we can bring to God all of our hopes, our dreams, our failings. We can have this kind of Naomi-like wobbly faith. What are the ways in your life right now that you're like, I don't feel like I have it all together. I'm frustrated. I'm stressed. I'm bitter. But I can bring that to the Lord because he is the one that can actually do anything about it. So in a little bit, we're going to transition and take communion together as a church. And before we do that, I want to actually ground us in something solid. Right? We have this wobbly faith like Naomi. A lot of us go through that. I've been in that place so many times in my life. And one of the ways is to come back and reaffirm, what do we believe as a church? And so as we get ready to just prepare our hearts for this communion meal, this table that Jesus set, I want to invite us to stand, and we're going to recite the Apostles' Creed here at the end of the service. This is just one of the ways that the church across the world and throughout time has affirmed. But what is the solid ground that we stand on? Even when my own faith is shaky and I still have a lot of questions, this is something that I can look to and say, these are truths from Scripture that have been curated over the years. So let me invite us to stand. Let's recite the Apostles' Creed, and I'll help transition us into this communion meal. The Apostles' Creed says, I believe in God.